Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my garden. Today's video is going to be about building this vegetable garden, the steps we took, and what we still have left to do. I also have a blog post on my blog, which is linked below, on how to start a garden. But I just wanted to show you how we went about getting this garden together and some of the plans we have for the future. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. As with real estate, when choosing a garden, the first thing to consider is location. Why does location matter? Well, in a vegetable garden, you want a location that gets at least 6 full hours of sunlight. And on our property, I had limited options. The back of our property we use as an orchard. And I know I didn't want the vegetable garden there. I wanted it within walking distance of the house. Now our house is right there, so this made a good option. Another option was to put it right there where the flower gardens are, but the flower gardens were already in progress when I decided to expand the vegetable garden. We could have chosen an area over there, but it would have required cutting down more trees and losing the privacy at the front of our yard, so that was not an option. The other option was clearing this area where we now have the vegetable garden. Now what I will do is insert some footage showing you what this area looked like before we got to clearing it. We had a friend who works in grading and clearing for a living, and we had him to come over, and my husband took down the trees at first, and then he came over, removed the stumps, pushed it all back into the woods, and it's all back here. The next thing we did is we had another friend come over who had a tractor, and he took out all the roots and whatnot, and my husband and I went by hand and pulled up all the debris and rocks and whatever else was. Wanted you to see that cloudless sulfur butterfly. So we went through and by hand picked out all the rocks and debris that were left over. The next step was laying out the garden. After having the area cleared, we measured it off and had it fenced in. Why did we choose to fence it? Well, we live in an area with high deer pressure, and I knew that I did not want to be fighting the deer for my produce as well as my trees all the time. So we had it fenced. That actually took the majority of my budget for the garden season. And when all was said and done, that first year I gardened mostly in ground. I amended the soil, and from that, I got a bountiful harvest. After the fencing was put in, we kind of ran out of money because we had to pay each person who came and graded and cleared, and then pay the guy who ran the fencing for us, which the garden itself is 60 by 40. I wanted 50 by 50, but my husband did not want to lose this tree right here. And so as a result of that, we decided to go wider on this side versus that side. The next thing that we did is we got a load of cinder blocks. We knew that cinder blocks made for an excellent material for raised beds. We did cinder blocks. We have friends who've gardened in it exclusively for years. You can actually plant in the cinder blocks like there and there. And you can plant in the individual holes as well as the box that you create and maximize the square footage that you have for gardening. Once we did that, I was able to plant certain things, and I had a pretty good year that year, planting both in ground and in the cinder block raised beds. The following year, I added my first of a series of raised metal beds, which is what the garden is going to be filled with eventually. After the fencing was completed, we made the decision that we were going to garden both in ground as well as in raised beds. We looked at the fact that this garden was going to be our garden here long term, and we wanted it to go the distance with us and to age with us. That being said, we opted to go with raised beds rather than exclusively gardening in ground to avoid bending over. It just so happens that my husband got hurt during this time, and we eventually made the decision to do mostly tall raised beds to allow him to garden for as long as he can, as much as he can, when he wants to. So we did that and began adding raised beds to the garden. Now, for you, I highly recommend that you do what works best for you, for your family, and for your budget. Budgetarily, we could not afford to just buy all the garden beds at one time, so they've been added slowly over time to the garden. I want to swap out the cinder block beds and then replace a couple of other beds that I have, and then I'll be done. Probably another 6 or 7 raised beds in the garden, and the design will be complete as far as growing spaces. We still have work to do as far as the hardscape. We're probably going to put in some kind of a compacted gravel pathway so that my husband can use his all-terrain wheelchair on it, or on days when he is feeling strong enough and up to it, he can actually walk with his rolling walker. Right now, it's not the best and safest for him, but it's better than if it were gravel. So we've left it as dirt, but we'll eventually address it. The next thing that we focused on was getting adequate water to the garden. There's the garden there, and here's our water access. We have a hose link in the garden to avoid tripping for my husband. This is a standpipe, and here is our well. We have a well here, and all of our water for our property comes from it. So we water with it, we bathe, cook, drink this water as well. So what we did is I paid a plumber to come and put in a frost-free standpipe. This, you turn on and off this way, but it allows us to have water directly outside the garden. Now, one of the things that I wanted to do was to put a drip system in, but we just didn't have it in the budget. And shortly thereafter, the year we had budgeted to do it, my husband got hurt and all the funds were diverted to other things. So it's on the 5-year plan. I'm just not sure when that's going to be done. In the meantime, I keep going and I'll water by hand the garden when needed. And what I'll do is I'll break it up into 2 parts. I'll do half one day and do half the next. And that truly works out for us. My husband also has a splitter on the pipe so that he can use it to water his nursery plants. There's our dog, but he has plants in pots for his test nursery here, and then all the way back in there and behind the vegetable garden there. So he has quite the operation, and we both use the water to water. Might as well pick me a couple raspberries while I'm at it. You want to make sure that there is a water source close to your garden so that you're not having to lug water by pails. One of the plans that we have long term is we're going to collect water off of the well and place 2 IBC totes, the big water totes, back here, and collect the water and use that to water the vegetable garden. We already have the totes. I just need to pay someone to come and put in the gutters and hook up the system for us. So that's in the plan, probably late this year or early next year, to get ready for next year's garden season. So that would be the first part of the watering plan, is to get the gutters put on, collect the water, and then run the water into the garden. But in the meantime, this is working for us and has worked the last 3 years. Now, looking back, one of the first things we did was put a pollinator garden in the center of the garden. Right here, you see it with the bird bath, to bring the pollinators to the garden in order to have as best a harvest as we can. I've not ever had to hand pollinate anything in the garden because I made sure to plant enough flowers. An additional thing that I did is I put a flower garden in front of the vegetable garden. So I have all sorts of pollinators. Now look at the garden the first year. This is the first year garden. I used every available space, and I used many different types of trellises to be able to grow the most food. Like I said, most of it was in ground, but I did use some pots. I went to a local nursery and he made available to me at minimal cost the big black pots that you'll see in my garden. I also tried different foods here. I had peppers, which is a mainstay in my garden, but I also planted roselle hibiscus, which is a food that's unique to me in Jamaica. I planted loads of brassicas. I planted different beans and peas because I wanted to see what would do well in the garden. Now here are pictures from last year's garden, and as you can see, the garden has grown tremendously. There are a lot of trellises, there are a lot of raised beds. I've got more structure and it's beginning to look like I want it to look. I put in an arbor. I'm working on making it the best version of what I have in mind. These are footage that I shot for Instagram from last year, and I just wanted you to see what that looks like, the garden in full swing. I have a bird bath, which in this video needed clearly to be cleaned, but I do have a bird bath in the vegetable garden for the birds that come. And I do want them to come because they feed on the caterpillars, they feed on some of the bugs that would normally be destructive in the garden. So water source for the bees and the birds, flowers for the bees and the birds, the hummingbirds that is, the water source, and then varying trellises to ensure that I have places to grow tomatoes and beans and peas and things that vine. You want to ensure also that you are planting things that you know your family will eat and love. Don't just plant it because it's popular. That's another big tip I have for planting a vegetable garden. Another tip is use good soil when filling your raised beds, and top up with good soil, amend with compost, worm castings, and all the good rich nutrients that you can put every year to ensure that you have the best garden. This year I had the worst garden that I've had since I've been gardening because I did not amend my soil. Thank you so much for joining me today as we talked about the vegetable garden. I hope this has answered all the questions that you have. If not, please feel free to leave them below and I'll answer them. If you've enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing. Until next time.